First, let's review. A species is a group of organisms that are closely related and can mate to produce fertile offspring. Second, comparing the anatomy and DNA of organisms provides evidence that organisms have common ancestors. So what is classification? Classification is the division of organisms into groups or classes based on specific characteristics. These characteristics can include the anatomy or DNA sequence of organisms. So some of you may be asking, why classify? Scientists classify organisms to help make sense and order of the many kinds of organisms in the world, living and extinct. Basically, scientists want to know which organisms are more closely related to which other organisms. Classifying helps scientists answer some questions, like what are the defining characteristics of species? When did the characteristics of an organism evolve? What are the relationships between various species? So we come to the question, how do scientists classify? Scientists use taxonomy, which is the science of describing, naming, and classifying organisms. We will learn this concept in more detail in another lecture. Scientists also use shared derived characteristics. This is a characteristic that two or more kinds of organisms share with their recent common ancestor. Finally, scientists use branching diagrams to show which characteristics organisms share and when these organisms evolved. The rest of our lecture will now focus on the analyzing and construction of branching diagrams. So what do we need when making a branching diagram? Well, we need characteristics. And what kind of characteristics can we use? We can use any anatomical characteristics, or we can use DNA sequences. Now let's practice making a branching diagram. We're going to have 4 organisms: a frog, a snake, a kangaroo, and a rabbit. So the first thing we should think about is, what do these animals have in common, and what makes them different? First, draw a branching diagram as the one on the screen. Now label frog, snake, kangaroo, and rabbit as shown on the screen. So now, let's think. What characteristic or characteristics do all these organisms share? Well, I can think of 2 things. All these organisms are air-breathing, and they all have the ability to live on land. So let's place these characteristics on our branching diagram. So the characteristics of air-breathing and the ability to live on land are the shared derived characteristics of frogs, snakes, kangaroos, and rabbits. Now remember, as stated earlier in our lecture, shared derived characteristics are characteristics that 2 or more kinds of organisms share with their most recent common ancestor. So now let's think of what characteristic or characteristics snakes, kangaroos, and rabbits share, or what makes snakes, kangaroos, and rabbits different from frogs. Well, I can think of one thing. Snakes, kangaroos, and rabbits all have dry skin, as frogs have wet skin. And snakes, kangaroos, and rabbits give birth on land, as frogs give birth in ponds or lakes. So now, let's place our 2 characteristics on our branching diagram. So now let's think of what characteristics kangaroos and rabbits share. Well, I can think of 2 things. Kangaroos and rabbits both have fur, and they both give live birth, as compared to frogs and snakes, which don't have hair and which don't give live birth. So let's place these characteristics on our branching diagram. And finally, let's think of what character or characteristics distinguishes rabbits from frogs, snakes, and kangaroos. Well, again, I can think of one other characteristic. Rabbits, as compared to kangaroos, develop fully inside the mother. So let's place this characteristic on our branching diagram.